I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to the Sidebar, a weekly show in the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we're very pleased to be joined by Geoff Calkins from the Daily Memphian. So stay with us for a conversation with Geoff. Geoff, how are you today?
I'm good.
Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
You're in shorts. Just some good podcasts.
It's hot out there. It's hot out there.
Why else are you in shorts?
And I totally forgot about this. And so I did my radio show. And then I'm like, it pops up on my schedule. And I was, I guess I got to bus tail down to the Tennessee Brewery and get here to do this podcast. So that's the other reason I'm in shorts.
Yes. Tennessee Brewery, the world headquarters of Daily Memphian. Technically, we're in the lofts, but anyway, right. The same neighborhood. So you wrote recently about a kind of semi-poorly kept secret that you're, for us, but you're shifting away from sports in terms of columns. And I want to talk about that and talk about your new focus. Also we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of Daily Memphian. It's got to be almost your 5-year employment anniversary right around the corner.
That was a glorious period when I was paid to leave the commercial appeal and yet not working. We weren't up and running. So I aspire to get back to that day when someone pays me not to work. But yes, it's probably 5 years my employment date.
And we'll touch a bit on Jennifer Biggs, and just quickly, since I just mentioned her name, Jennifer, as many people know, was diagnosed with colon cancer. She is out of the hospital. She is in recovery, but it's been a long ago. But we'll talk a bit more about that in the column you just wrote about her. But let's start with the last week, I think it was, you wrote a columm and you announced what has been sort of a poorly kept secret, that you're going to shift away from 90+% sports.
Yeah.
Why?
No, it's funny. I did the Calvary Lenten lecture series last year, which was one of the more intimidating things I've ever done. I was asked to preach at the lecture series, and even then, I sort of said, I'm kind of ready to shift. But then it was a question of getting folks at the Daily Memphian up to, like, someone else has to write about sports if I'm not writing about sports. And so the truth of the matter is, right now, I look at the Daily Memphian and, Chris and Drew on the Grizzlies are the best in the world on the Grizzlies, and Parth and Tim and Frank on the top. So some of it is just the timing seemed right.
And Varlas on preps.
And then of course John on preps. Like I honestly never was very good at helping him. He was always, the reason I didn't mention preps was he was always, So no, I've done it for 27 years, and it has been so much fun. Like I said this before. It has been the best 3 decades of my life. It has been the place where I was allowed to become sort of the best version of myself. And even in the context of all the struggles that Memphis has right now, I don't really think it's a coincidence that Memphis is the place where I was allowed, to sort of reach what I wanted to do and have an impact. And because I think that's one of the gifts of this city, is that you can do that. And I came here unaware of all of that, not knowing how it would work out, never really having set foot in Memphis, only once. And I've had an absolute blast. So why? Well, 2 reasons. One is, after a while, honestly, the daily grind of covering every trade, every signing, every game, it kind of wears you down. I'm ready to have some weekends and nights and stuff like that.
I'm going to intercede to say, I don't know how you've done it so long. Right. I mean, I really don't. Right. It is kind of crazy. And I've said this about you before, and then I'll let you keep going. That I didn't expect, when we knew each other a bit, over the years, but we certainly never worked together and didn't know each other that well. But when you came over and we fired up Daily Memphian and all that, there, at that point, you were 22 years into your career, and you could have sort of it would have been okay if you were sort of phoning it in a little bit. It would have been okay. He worked. This is the speed at which Geoff works. I was blown away from day one. Oh no, this is it's like there's a sword of Damocles hanging over your head kind of level of effort that you put out.
Well, and that's partly, I guess, if you were capable, if you're wired to mail it in, but some of what comes with it is I felt a deep responsibility. I could have said, I don't need to be at every press conference or every game or whatever else.
Right.
I'm just, and I think this is true generally, a lot of people who are decent at their jobs operate out of fear and insecurity, right? I once worked with someone who thought that everything they wrote was the greatest thing in the world. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
Whereas I always hold up Scott Cacciola, who's now at the New York Times, was with us at the CA at one point. He thought everything he wrote was just the worst. And he was brilliant. Like, I really think that I have always operated out of, I have to prove myself. I mean, it's just true.
Yeah.
Like, and so some of that, was the responsibility of, if this is happening, I got to know about it, and so that was part of it. There's no question that was part of it. The other part of it was, though, is that if I look back at the columns that I remember, the columns that I'm particularly proud of, almost none of them had to do with games, like almost or a trade or a draft or whatever. Like, those are the columns that in the old days I wouldn't have cut out and sent to people, or no one else would have cut them out and put them on the refrigerator. They weren't that, or email. It's none of those columns. It's always the columns about people, really. And so, I mean, I'm pretty proud of the columns that I wrote when the Grizzlies were coming here, like that set of columns. But basically, the columns I love best are columns about people, and so I don't just need to write about sports people. Mostly, I just want to write about people. And I don't know how if I'm going to do this for another 3 years or 5 years or whatever, but it just struck me there's a whole big wide world out there. And honestly, this year in particular, with the Tyree Nichols stuff happening, with the Eliza Fletcher stuff happening, there were moments when I felt kind of silly writing about sports. And so I said, let's give this other thing a go. Really, that's it.
You think about two of the most impactful columns you've written in recently were the one about Jennifer Biggs this last weekend, who you've known and worked with, has been a friend for 20 plus years, and her, just what a wonderful person she is. And the one about John Morant that was not really a sports story. It was much more about this is a young man really struggling with something. I've thought, and I don't know if you and I, because we don't see each other that much, but he's about the same age as our boys. You have 3 boys, I have 1. I mean, he's the same age as my kids and your kids, essentially. This young man with a huge contract. And it was an incredibly empathetic. You also wrote some columns like calling him out, but the one that just said, hey, what's going on with this kid, separate from sports. And I do think that's where, again, so whether you write going forward about a sports figure or somebody at Daily Memphian or someone who no one's ever heard of, or few of you ever heard of, that it is really pretty remarkable.
So at this point, I don't care so much about contests. There were a time when I really cared about contests, but in the sports writing world, there's this one contest called Associated Press Sports Editors Contest, and that's the one that matters. That's the one that matters to sports writers. And I happened to win that this year, and that was nice and all that. But I looked at the columns that I wrote. One was about the finish Eliza's run, where Memphis by the thousands went out at 4 a.m. to finish Eliza's run. One was about the day that they had pole vaulting on Beale Street, which was just this incredible scene of pole vaulting. Like, a lot of people have gone over bars before on Beale Street, just not like that, And one was about Jerry Lawler and a kid who he had befriended many years before, and it was just I could write all those columns. And my new gig, literally, I could have written I could write all those columns. And I hope that a greater percentage of my columns will be that kind of column. The struggle for me will be, now that there's this giant world to write about, what corner of the world do you write about? And it was one thing to try to be an expert on Tigers, Grizzlies, whatever else. Like, we did this incredible crime series recently on the poll. And I'm inclined to maybe, or thought about weighing in on it. But so many people have been thinking and writing about this for so long that I have to figure out, am I going to be addressing the serious issues facing Memphis, or am I going to, and so that will be a work in progress, honestly, figuring out what I have to say that's valuable too. I don't just want to say something. I've never wanted to just say something to say it. I want to be able to contribute. And so, I think it could be a little bit of a work in progress getting this going, but I'm looking forward to the next few years of doing it.
Again, we're here with Geoff Calkins, columnist for Daily Memphian, also longtime host of radio. So will the radio show, I think you're going to change that up a bit too. I mean, it's still a sports station. Yeah. It's still ESPN flagship, et cetera.
The radio show, 9 to 11 on 92.9. And I've already, occasionally, I don't stick to sports. I've never,
especially in COVID too. You kind of
COVID was like there were no sports,
right?
So, but it's always been 80, 90% sports. But I have, starting at COVID, there's really in this city very little radio talk. There's almost no radio talk show. Like we don't have that here. And so like the old Drake and Zeke show, right? And so like one of the things I'm doing is Sam Hardiman from this paper has been gracious enough that he comes on every Wednesday, not to talk about hockey, although he could talk about hockey.
He would love to.
And he would love to.
Every day.
The Taylor Hall deal yesterday, like he texted me about it, but to talk about the city. Yeah. And it's tremendous. Like it's a great segment every Wednesday, and I'll do more of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, I go in and out listening to your show, not because I don't like it, but because I'm so OCD that if I listen to things, I listen to them obsessively, and it gets to be problematic. The things over the years, I'm a huge Grizzlies fan, so I like listening to you and Chris and others talk about the Grizzlies, but I am more interested often in the non-Grizzly stuff. That was also true when I used to be the Dan Patrick show after he left ESPN. I would listen to that as a podcast. And if they started talking about the, 3-4 defense for the Bills, I mean, no offense to you and the Bills and football. Yeah. I'm like, hey, I'm done with that. But when they would talk about
Bills run a 4-3, by the way, not a 3-4.
It's been years. So it's been years. Right? Back when I was watching the Bills, ground, what was it? Chuck Knox. I think that honestly, is more like and there is a lack of that. It's very
there's your
TV
show. There's behind the headlines, but there's not a lot of where do you turn to really hear people talk about this podcast.
This podcast, yeah. A bit on YXR, some other shows that are
there's
YXR.
Not a lot, and I think there is a hunger for it, and I don't think people turn the channel when they get to that. I think like I'm having Sam's tomorrow is going to talk about why we struggle with so many trees down and power outage and whatever else. And who doesn't care about that? Most of Memphis cares about that.
It is an interesting evolution from when there was a lot of that on, whatever radio stations, FM radio stations, when we were growing up. I mean, the DJs were talking about all kinds of things going on. There was more and more. The Drake and Zeeks, and every city had them. And it was across various genres. And then AM radio was a lot of local talk. It might have been very political, but now it's a lot of national syndicated.
People have cut back on staff. Like everything's nationally programmed music and whatever. And podcasts have filled a lot of space nationally. Like you can get podcasts on anything nationally. Local podcasts, just because the numbers, it's harder to accumulate numbers. They have not taken, this wouldn't be the obvious exception, but like, there's not a lot of local sports podcasts. There's not a local so radio is still a good place for local talk, particularly in a city like Memphis, which is a slightly slower adopter, I think, of podcasts in the world of podcasts. Radio is a good place to do that. And it's still fun.
Let me do a little housekeeping. Come back and talk more here with Geoff Calkins. Just a reminder, I'm Eric Barnes. This is the Sidebar, as we were just talking about. It airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. Focus on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. But obviously, it's not just a radio show. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Behind the Headlines podcast. We do Bill Drees and Sam Hardiman's politics podcast called On the Record. There's a Memphis Grizzlies podcast that Chris Harrington and Drew Hill host. And there's Soundbites, a food podcast hosted by Jennifer Biggs and Chris Harrington. That one also airs on WYXR every Thursday at 11, right before this show. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Although, if you are one of the millions of our followers who get the show on Stitcher, according to Natalie Van Gundy, producer of all these shows, has informed me that Stitcher is they're just ending. They're just going out of business. They're merging with Pandora by end of August, so the show will not be available. Will the show be on Pandora then as part of it? Is it on Pandora now?
I don't know.
Wow. We don't know, but we're going to find out. So all kinds of new excitement around Stitcher that's coming up. So again, more seriously, just be looking to change where you get your podcasts. We are on all the other platforms, we believe. You can also get the show on this show. You can get on the WYXR.org website or the WYXR app. It's a great app, great way to listen to this show, all the talk shows on WYXR, but also all the archives of the music shows of the various hosts. All those are on there as well. I should also note that WYXR is a nonprofit listener-supported radio station. So consider becoming a member, consider donating. donating, you can go to the WYXR site and learn more about doing that. I should also say the Daily Memphian, if you're not a subscriber, do become one. We appreciate that very much. We're also nonprofit, reader-supported news, which we'll talk about more as we come up on our 5-year anniversary here with Geoff. Coming up soon on the Sidebar in the coming weeks, we've got Ben Smith, the owner and chef at Tsunami. They're celebrating 25 years, which is crazy. So that'll be good. We've also got some other folks from the Daily Memphian coming on through the summer talking about our upcoming 5-year anniversary in September. We recently had Otis Sanford on. It was great. Otis is always great, but it was just really fun to talk to him about all kinds of things as he continues to work really hard, but retires from U of M, continues to write for us, continues to commentary on various platforms in town. I mentioned Behind the Headlines, which we do with the good folks over at WKNO every Friday. We've got Steve Mulroy, Shelby County District Attorney, coming up this week. The next week, Mayor Palazzolo from Germantown, as well as Brent Taylor, State Senate candidate. And then we have started our series of interviews with the top candidates for Memphis mayor. Last week we had Frank Colvett, the Memphis city councilman, and we'll be having the other 7 will all be invited if they haven't been invited already. And we'll try to get them all on the show over the course of the summer before early voting starts. We also have a debate coming up, more information that we're doing with WKNO, more information on that coming up soon. I mentioned Jennifer at the top, obviously, and if you're joining us late and you haven't heard, Jennifer Biggs was diagnosed with colon cancer recently. She had what appears to be successful surgery, but it's obviously a very hard go and a long ways to go still. But I'm actually hosting, I will have hosted because it's a time warp. I will have hosted Soundbites this week because Chris Harrington's out. So Holly Whitfield and I did an amazing job earlier today hosting Soundbites. It was remarkable and amazing. I can't even tell you any details. It was so good. And then I may help fill in if Chris isn't available because Chris obviously has a lot going on. And then hopefully Jennifer will be back in the seat as soon as possible. You wrote, Geoff, a really beautiful column. Makes me choke up a bit, honestly, about Jennifer. It was in part, she does a give or take monthly lunch series group for us. That's always really fun. I try to go by sometimes. I think you've gone by before, but last Friday was, Jennifer couldn't be there. She really wanted us to go on with the show. And so I and you and Chris Harrington was there, tried to kind of host without her, which not replace her. And you wrote a really beautiful column off that. You've known Jennifer how long now?
It's funny. I don't know when Jennifer and I became friends. Like I've known Jennifer, I guess, for a long time because she was at the CI and I was at the CI. But I think it was only when, it was really sort of me, Jennifer, and Chris. You were already here at the Daily Memphian getting it off the ground. But in terms of people who were hired, it felt like we were sort of 3 who you all reached out to.
Yeah.
And I already knew Chris because of sports, but just over time then, Jennifer's one of my best friends. I
didn't know her that well before then.
I don't think
kind of casual work friends kind of before that.
I
didn't know that.
Not that well. And like Jennifer is someone who I talk to, 3 or 4 or 5 times a week just to chat. I'm a phone chatter and she is a chatter. And so we chat and gossip, honestly. It's one of the things I like about Jennifer is that she likes
Jennifer
gossip.
Gossips. I didn't know that. And I didn't know that about you either.
And
this is
so,
all a revelation today.
So I really like that. And she's funny. I have a friend who says that you get to a point in life where you don't make friends, you recognize them. And I love that because I think that's true. You make friends, you have to meet them and stuff. But when you meet someone who just clicks with you, you reckon that person is like, and that's how it was with Jennifer. I also think it's true, as someone said at the luncheon, everybody in the city thinks they're Jennifer's best friend. And that is a tribute to Jennifer. Like that is a tribute to Jennifer. Yes. And she also is an unbelievably prolific, passionate, funny, gifted journalist. And what I tried to write, and again, it's not, we hope that Jennifer's back sooner rather than later and is able to do this job. And, for all kinds of reasons. And she's got a daughter and grandkids, and I want her to live 50 more years. But one of the things that really struck me is at its best, journalism isn't just about, and I don't think the Daily Memphian is just about the facts, ma'am. It's about building community. It's about connecting community. That's what local papers partly do. And Jennifer, I think, as much or more than anyone at the Daily Memphian, has helped forge community. In the Facebook group, in the lunches that she does, even just the way she connects people to people and people to restaurants. Like she gets people, when people are afraid to go out of their home now because whatever reason, she'll say, try this new restaurant. Like she connects us to Memphis.
Yeah.
And I just am I've always been dazzled by her. And and plus on top of it, she's a great friend. So I wish her, of course, all the best.
Yeah. It is funny to think about what Jennifer did during COVID, when restaurants and the food industry,
they were on the front line, and then she was covering the healthcare. I
can't remember. She told me, because she's covering
like the health department.
She's the health department, and I can't. Natalie Van Gundy might remember how many COVID tests she took. There's some insane.
She always had a stash.
She
had a giant
it was like
stash,
50 or something. It's some.
Still take a COVID.
Oh yeah, she'll take a COVID test like some people, eat a lifesaver, but it was really remarkable. It was incredibly important because it wasn't just about XYZ restaurant is closed or open. It was this sort of manifestation of all this disruption and the kind of chaos, especially at first.
And the anger and the frustration.
Absolutely.
And all that stuff, honestly. And then just very recently with the crime stuff, she's written about restaurants, safety.
Yeah.
What do they do? Parking lots, all this stuff. Like food is, in addition to being great fun and wonderful to eat, it's also the sort of front lines of a lot of stuff in the city. And so writes, it's not just food writer. Oh, how's this cheeseburger? It's life and culture and society in Memphis.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What we got here? 5-6 minutes left. We're talking about, again, we don't have a bunch more updates on Daily Memphian, on Jennifer Biggs. Jennifer's a very prolific Facebook person, and you probably be more up to date if you go to Jennifer Biggs's Facebook, and she'll kind of let you know where she's doing. But she has obviously appreciated, I think, all the messages people have sent. She isn't necessarily responding to all of them, but I think she is getting them all and is appreciated. She sees them. So, because a few people have emailed me or they've seen me and they've said, hey, what can I do? Should I call? I don't want to disrupt her. I think you can message her. Just don't expect she's going to message you back necessarily, whether that's on Facebook or if you have her phone number or email or whatever it is. Shifting with just a few minutes left here with Geoff Calkins. 5 years, it'll be 5 years from launch in September. I think it's September 17th or September 18th. I think it was the night of September 18th and really September 17th. And then we went live and people started seeing it that following morning. It is funny to think about this time 5 years ago where we did, and I've told other people, because once a month, sometimes twice a month, sometimes at conferences, people say, well, how'd you guys do what you did? And I walk through all the mistakes we made. I walk through some of the smart things we did. And inevitably, if they're really serious about it, I remember talking to the folks at the Baltimore Banner, they're about a year plus old now, and very much are very open about having followed our model. They're much bigger now. I mean, they're approaching 100 people. We have about 50 people, et cetera. But I remember talking to their funder, board chair, CEO, and another guy on a Zoom call. And they said, well, how'd you hire everybody and get launched? Like, how do you have everybody in place to get launched? I said, well, we hired all these people and we told them not to do anything for the summer. And they looked at me like, no way. I go, yeah. They're like, that's really expensive. I said, yeah, except for the people who are behind, like Jason Israel, our amazing chief technology officer, and Kevin Leip at the time, and other people who behind the scenes were going nuts trying to build everything and get everything set up. We knew we needed you and Jennifer and Chris and many other people. And so we started hiring people, and they were like, well, what do I do? There's nothing. Just tell me you're going to be there whenever we launch. And we didn't exactly know when we were going to launch. We were going to try to, if we formed May 1st of 2018, I was employee number 1 and Jason Israel was employee number 2. You were not far after. I think Jennifer was employee 5. I think I looked at that recently. And we were going to launch in August, and it was which was insane and stupid. But we thought we were cocky enough to think we could get it done by August, and it wasn't until September. And there was a couple months where I remember Chris started a blog because he was like, I got to write something down.
Don't you miss weighing in on the issues of the day? I'm like, no, I'm just fine here. Thanks.
You
very
had
much.
The radio show though, right? You had some way to occupy yourself.
And then I'd be done at 11 o'clock every day. Like, those were the days. It's funny though, like when you all recruited me, I've never had a contract. I have a contract at the radio station, but it doesn't do me any good. They can fire me, but I can't, I can't do anything that could. But I'd never had a contract in journalism. But I was sufficiently wary about the future of this upstart Daily Memphian that for the first time ever, I was like, okay, I'll come, but you guys got to have a contract and it's got to pay me even if you go belly up. Like, and that was like, I was all for it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And what's amazing now is so much is amazing. The idea that in this journalism economy, you have created a 40-person newsroom or whatever it is. It's 40. Yeah. It's astonishing. It's breathtaking. It's unbelievable. It really is a borderline miracle. Yeah. And like I was at a panel on crime the other day, and people just talk about the Daily Memphian as the paper of record. Like that's the other thing that's happened. So absolutely incredible that has happened. And are we perfect? Still, of course not. We're not perfect, but it is interesting. I have I don't know what my role will be going forward or how long this new gig is going to work or if I'm going to be good at it. But like any of that concern about the place of the Daily Memphian in the firmament and it is gone. Like, and that's to the credit of you and the board and everybody and honestly subscribers, who have flocked and who pay money every month to participate in this community. Yeah.
It is weird. I mean, because I get to go to these conferences and whether that's Zoom or a lot more in person and I was at 4 or 5 different publishing very locally news focused conferences in January and February. And people just almost don't believe me when I say we have 40 and that we have, 18 to really 20 something thousand paid subscribers and that, there's another 10 or 15 people outside the newsroom. And then I'm like, oh yeah. And by the way, we have 15 freelancers who contribute every time. And they say, well, what the hell, what do you cover? And I'm like, well, we have a traditional mission. We cover kind of everything from metro to business to sports to food to arts and culture. And that blows them away. Because everybody in the industry
is niche.
They've gone to niche. And, there's a lot of these nonprofit, which at some point, another time I'll go on my rant about the pros and cons of nonprofit journalism. It's worked really well for us because we generate so much revenue through subscriptions and advertising. We, as I've always said, we try to run it like a business. But it is interesting that I thought, and Andy and I both thought, Andy Cates, the board chair, one of the co-founders of this thing, and we thought we weren't trying to build the biggest in the country. We weren't even necessarily thinking, well, this would be so groundbreaking. It was just, that was the model after we looked at all the other models that made sense. And since we've launched, only one entity has launched with a similar model. And that's Baltimore Banner, which God bless them and good luck. And they're bigger than us now. So we're the second biggest. And everywhere else, it's little niche sites or it's continued cutting by the big chains.
I think some of it is, it seems unimaginable. If you're in wherever, pick a city, can we recreate? Like, no, we can't. It seems too big. Like it seems this idea that we're going to build another newsroom, and it's like, no, we can cover state politics, or we can cover environmental stuff, or we can cover and we need 2 people or 3 people to do that, and we can. But the idea of, oh no, we're going to go out and build a 40-person newsroom, that's insane. They don't have a 40-person newsroom with the legacy paper now.
It's half that.
It's
19.
So it's pretty astonishing.
Which is not their fault. And I want to beat up on them. It's just the nature of what has happened nationally. That is typical across the country. Yeah. In a lot of places, it's been worse. I mean, you look at some others.
There are papers. I was reading about the paper in Eugene, Oregon, which was, I mean, you're sort of up in that neck of the woods. I don't know what it used to be, a newsroom of 90, and now it's down to, I'm misspeaking, but 3 or 2 or 1, or like, it's like just, it's crazy. Crazy. And that's, by the way, when I get back to Jennifer, I really do think newspapers in this incredibly polarized world we're in, they can be part of the connective tissue. And when that is ripped away, I think in addition to the investigative element and all of that, but when that is ripped away, some of that connective tissue is gone.
I go on my whole rant. There's even academic research on that. We're out of time pretty much. Geoff, I always try to ask people, maybe we did with you once before, but what was your first concert that you went to?
First concert was James Taylor. Nice. James Taylor at the Niagara Convention Center. And I don't know why that's funny. And then I've seen him probably 18 times since. Like my musical taste stopped at James Taylor. And it began at James Taylor and ended at James Taylor. But Carly Simon. I saw Carly Simon once. She canceled the tour right after because she was so uncomfortable. Like she has real stage fright stuff going on. It was a weird concert. I did an early concert that I went to see that was mostly because a musical friend of mine wrangled me into it, was the Kinks. I saw the Kinks opening Ian Drury and the Blockheads opened for the Kinks.
Wow.
I mean, I've seen Tom Petty. I've seen Tom Petty. I've seen a bunch of them, but mostly I've seen James Taylor.
All right. On that note, that is all the time we have this week. Geoff Calkins, thanks so much. Again, if you missed any of the show today, you can get it on the WYXR site, the Daily Memphian, or wherever you get your podcasts, except Stitcher.